That's the stuff that's really difficult to decarbonize. And so we're talking about an $8 trillion industry, right? If we're talking about replacing fossil fuels and hydrocarbons, essentially our task is we need to find other sources of hydrogen and carbon. So sources that are green and sustainable, but also at least close to cost competitive, because that's how we're going to switch over the industry. So that's where.
So my second guest is Koji. Koji is the CEO of Key Hydrogen, and everyone has an impact that they can make, no matter how small it is. You never know where the ripple effect will travel and what impact you will make in another person's life. Maybe that person will be the next who's going to change the world. Let's make climate cool again. Let's make climate cool again. High five.
Yay! You're listening to Bite Size Climate Tech. Season 3.
Koji is the CEO, as I mentioned, Key Hydrogen. He's also an engineer himself. He's been on my Season 2 podcast. He talks about how to use biomass to produce green hydrogen. It's so fun. But today, he's going to talk about a more broader topic, is green molecules.
Green molecules.
So please go ahead.
Very, very fun topic. Broadly, when you think about getting to net zero and decarbonizing everything, it sounds like a very daunting challenge, but you can kind of simply break it down into two categories. It's green electrons and green molecules. So green electrons, we're doing a really great job of. So just renewable electricity. How do we electrify everything, which is always going to be the best way to decarbonize. But even with the most optimistic 2050 IEA or the International Energy Agency projections, electricity will be about 50% of total final energy consumption, which means you have another whole half of kind of the energy spectrum that you need to decarbonize. But really, everything that is made from the fossil fuel industry today. So that's plastics, that's resins, that's coatings, paints, pharmaceuticals, cosmetics. Pretty much like everything in this room has some derivative from fossil fuels. That's the stuff that's really difficult to decarbonize and I guess de-link from fossil fuels. So we're talking about an $8 trillion industry, right? Green electrons, I think we're doing pretty good at. We're about 30% globally kind of renewable electricity. We'd like to get it to higher, but it's decent. But when you talk about green molecules, probably about less than 1%. So it's a lot harder, a lot more kind of innovation needed in that area.
I think yesterday you told me like everything you can basically break it down into.
Yeah. When you look at the fossil fuel industry and fossil fuels, oil and gas and coal, they're all what you call hydrocarbons. Mm-hmm. So they're just long chains of hydrogen and carbon. It's very energy dense and rich. And of course, that's why we use that and we make all the things we do. So if we're talking about replacing fossil fuels and hydrocarbons, essentially our task is we need to find other sources of hydrogen and carbon. So sources that are green and sustainable, but also at least close to cost competitive, because that's how we're going to switch over the industry. So that's where a lot of the innovation is taking place. All those kind of derivatives that come after that, you can essentially kind of build up different, hydrogen and carbon. You'll have some other molecules in there, but those are kind of the two big building blocks, essentially.
How would you explain this to an 8-year-old?
I think the easiest thing is to imagine the world is made out of Legos. When you're building the world, there's two main types of Legos. Let's call them like red and blue Legos. That's kind of the hydrogen and carbon. And most of what you want to build, they're made out of those two Legos. So you just kind of stack them in different ways. You'll have some additional pieces as well, but those are the base building blocks. So it's a question of how do we get a lot of those red and blue Legos kind of cheaply.
Easily and cheaply.
Yeah.
You're going to answer a question from a previous guest.
Carbon abatement or direct air capture. What carbon transformation is the best solution to
How
carbon?
to deal with the carbon in the air, whether it's abatement or remove CO2.
Yes.
Of course, abatement's always the best option, right? Or analogy everyone talks about is like a bathtub full of water, and then you have the tap running in and all the CO2 being released into the atmosphere. And you can have a tap at the bottom to release or get rid of some of the water, but the first step should always be just close the tap if you want to stop the water from overflowing.
I have a follow-up question because yesterday someone asked, what's the timeline for these two? Whether you should decarbonize everything first and remove? What's the balance?
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is you need to do both. Again, through the projections, we need a lot of carbon removal just because we've already essentially overshot, right? We can go to net zero tomorrow, but CO2 stays in the atmosphere for hundreds of years, and it will continue absorbing heat and heating up the planet. So it's not like getting to net zero actually solves the problem. We already have too much CO2 into the atmosphere. So we do need somehow to remove it. Those removal technologies can take a very long time. There's a lot of different pathways. So there's certainly an argument that we need to pursue both in parallel, but it's a balance of what's kind of more important, what should get more resources. I think abatement should always remain the priority. And if there is, other kind of remaining emissions or eventually we need to remove emissions, then we get kind of more into the removal space.
Do you have a question for the next guest?
What climate technology do you think is being overlooked and needs more innovation and focus?
I have a new segment. Why did you start working in climate?
I started off more kind of in the impact focus area, which is going to sound wild when I tell you where I worked, which is on the other side of the climate spectrum. I was working at ExxonMobil. So when I talk about, petrochemicals and replacing oil and gas, I know what that's like. But when I talk about impact, it's because when I was thinking, what industries I can work in, energy was very clearly one of the most important things, globally. And when you're talking about lifting kind of entire societies and countries into well-being, providing cheap, reliable energy is one of the best ways to do that. But it's become very clear that energy also needs to be clean, oil and gas. And there were some kind of initiatives. Obviously, it was going to take way too long. There was leadership kind of made it clear that their priority was not in those areas. So then I decided to leave and kind of explored how I can have a more direct impact. And that's when I got into startups. I was an early hire at a company doing small modular nuclear reactors in the US. And then I was at a direct air capture company in Berlin. And then eventually started this company making hydrogen and biogenic carbon. So, the hydrogen carbon.
I think this is a very interesting topic because there are so many talent in other industry existing hard to abate industry. We should include everyone if they want to do a transformation and come to the bright side to make things better for the future. And that is the purpose of a podcast or information like this. We hope as many people as we can to reach those people and make this kind of message to go viral, because climate should be cool. When it's cool, it's easy for people to understand and to work in this cool industry. Let's make climate cool again. Yay!